Hi, welcome everyone to the Dr. Roz Show. My name is Dr. Roz Aker Black, clinical psychologist and the host of this show. I am so excited tonight that we are talking about Black men and mental health. So if you are watching, if you're here with us and you have any questions, please do not be afraid to post them in the chat. Our panelists here have agreed to answer questions tonight and to share their knowledge tonight. So I'm so excited. Everybody, all my panelists, I consider them all family. Dr. Jeff Menzie am I saying that correctly? Because for my whole life that I've known you, I've called you Grady.
Yes,
my whole entire
And now everyone else will be.
Listen, it wasn't until he graduated and he did the commencement speech that I realized that his name was Jeff, because everybody at Fisk University called him Grady because he looks like Grady from Sanford and Son. So I thought that was his name. So, but Dr. Jeff is my Fiskite brother. He is a warrior in this mental health fight. He's done some amazing things, such as you were the former president of ABPSI, right?
The DC chapter of Association of Black Psychologists. Yep.
Yes. So like you've been ushering this whole mental health thing for us for some time. And you're still in the DC area?
Yeah, I'm still at Morgan State University.
That's right. That's right. You're with Dr. Wimbush?
Yes, ma'am.
I am so jealous.
He likes to, his claim is that he stole me from Fisk. Because, you know, I was still at Fisk at the time. I left Fisk to go to Morgan.
I did not know that. Dr. Wimbush is the reason. Institute,
Campus Counseling Center, exchange, all of that. Yeah.
He's the reason why I'm a psychologist today, because he wrote my recommendation letter before I even applied.
Wow.
And he was like, apply. He's the reason why I'm a psychologist today. If you guys do not know about Dr. Wimbush, he is simply amazing. He's written several books. Fantastic. And he does not mince his words on race relations when it comes to race. So he definitely is a, not a pioneer, but beyond an expert on racial trauma and things of that nature. So I'm jealous that you get to work with him every single day. I'm so jealous. But
for the past 10 years.
Wow. And another thing about Dr. Jeff is that he also serves on the board for Taraji P. Henson's Foundation for Mental Health. So he's really like stepping up to the plate and being the voice for Black men when it comes to mental health. So I'm so excited to have him here, my Fiskite brother. So excited to have him here. Our next guest is Mr. Latauren Shang, who is he's my Facebook family. You would have thought that we grew up together and we've known each other all our lives, but we met in groups on Facebook and then we just became very close. He's an elder, a veteran. You know, he's here because he has a very unique view on when it comes to mental health. But I also asked him to be here because I want him to speak to the idea of you can still pray and go to therapy at the same time.
Yes, you can, without a doubt. Prayer is necessary.
Our community, people are just like, I'm just gonna pray about it, you know, not realizing that you need to do more. So we're so excited to have you here tonight, Reese Young, Latauren Shang. So excited to have you here tonight so that you can share some gems with us.
Glad to be here.
Yes, thank you. And then our next guest is Mr. Jay Armstrong, who is family. He is my family, my cousin, and he is doing incredible work. I'm sorry, Latauren Shang is in North Carolina, and Jay is in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and he is doing incredible work with, you know, Black men and Black boys. So I really wanted him to really speak to the symptomology that Black boys express, but it gets called everything else when it could just simply be depression. So without further ado, we are going to start the show. Thank you everyone for being here and dealing with our technical difficulties. I will be the first to admit that I'm not that savvy when it comes to technological things, but I think I have mastered Zoom. So I was like, if nothing else, we can pivot to Zoom. So thank you for everyone that followed us over here so that you can hear this amazing panel tonight. So Jay, we'll start with you. As I was thinking about this, I was thinking about the young boys that you're working with. You work with in Georgia too, as well?
I did.
Yeah. Right. So just the young boys that you're working with, and as we are coming off the trial of George Floyd, what were some of the conversations you were having with some of the young clients that you work with?
Yeah. Okay. So when I was with Georgia Hope, I was there for 5 years, and I worked with primarily underserved communities, a lot of minority, both African American and Latino youth as well. And in the agency I work with now, most of my clients are, well, all of them are males, but the majority of them are either adolescent males or and men. And so, it's and it's a very good question. I have been seeing a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of acting out, and even self-harm. And that was, you didn't hear about a lot of those issues, but particularly within our communities, several years ago, but you're seeing a lot of it right now. And of course, there's the typical behavioral issues, where they're getting into trouble at school. With all the other stigmas that are attached, a lot of these young boys, they're facing some pretty harsh consequences as a result of them feeling pain and not knowing what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I am seeing a lot of that basically, but primarily, Ross, just a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, and you've heard this story before, but I want to mention this. A conversation that I have had, with my clients and my own son, who just, by the way, just got his license. So he's just driving. One of the things that my wife and I did and made sure that he knew how to use it, we bought him a dash cam that sticks on his windshield. We told him how to use it, and we told him why we were getting it for him. And we all know why that conversation needed to be had.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm having it with a lot of my clients around that age who are driving, right? So they are aware of how to conduct themselves. They are already aware that they're targets. So, we're having some very necessary and scary conversations that we're having to have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I hope that answered the question as far as who I'm seeing and what are some of the issues and some of the conversations we had.
No,
that hard to
absolutely. That was perfect. If you're just logging on, can you please mute your phone, please? No, that was perfect. And you brought up self-harm, which we really don't talk about that much in our community, but it is a reality. We are we are experiencing suicidal ideations and suicide in our community with our young boys. Dr. Jeff, would you want to speak to that?
Yeah, it's very interesting. First of all, thank you for the invitation, Roz. I'm honored to be here with you as well as my fellow panelists. Say a special shout out to everybody that tuned in. Yeah, that part about self-harm and suicidal ideation, it is starting to, I think, come to the surface because I believe we recognize in the various ways that it may have always existed. Because, with young African-American males, not the kind that's going to, typically aren't the kind that's going to overdose on pills or, maybe even, use a gun, and shoot themselves. But they will sometimes wander into rival gang turf, waving a flag or, say suicide by cop. Some would say that the heavy substance use and abuse, like heavy consumption of alcohol and certain drugs. And now, it used to just be weed, back in the day, but now it's, it's all kind of pills being popped and cocaine being done. There's all kind of things happening. And some have actually looked at that as an expression of a slow suicide, and we see the substance use and abuse as a potential indicator of self-medicating for depression, but sometimes it's also suicidal because they get intoxicated and they get behind the wheel. They get so intoxicated that they literally pass out, and so, to me, those are things that have existed for a long time. And I think we're just now recognizing them as certain symptoms of suicidal ideation or potential for self-harm. It literally is self-harm though. But again,
Mhm.
under social constructs, we don't necessarily label it as such.
You know what? I had never thought about it in that sense. So I'm glad that you did bring that up, because we're just so used to saying, oh, it's self-medicating and like just playing that off. But you're right, it is the potential for self-harm.
Yep.
It absolutely is, because I have seen clients drink until they pass out.
Mhm.
So at any point that could be alcohol poisoning. I mean, you know what I mean? At any point it could be very detrimental to them. So thank you for making that point, because I don't even think that I had thought about it in that sense.
Right on, sis.
But that truly is plaguing our community, unfortunately. I mean, I hate the fact, and you live here in the DC metro area with me, Jeff, but now that weed is legal,
Yeah.
you can ride into DC and literally just your car will be consumed.
It's everywhere, and I have to start rolling up my windows, especially if the kids are with me. It's just like, and that's the other thing, because DC is also known for the Dipper and Love Boat, where
Right,
it's not just weed, it's laced up like a pair of boots. They
right.
got sprinkled some cocaine in there, might have put some LSD in there, might have dipped it in formaldehyde. And that's
Yeah.
also the secondhand smoke that you may be consuming. I think it was the Washingtonian magazine where they had a new one. It was a picture on the cover where it was like, instead of the Washington Monument, instead of the obelisk or the Tekken, it was a joint and it was lit. And the caption was "the new scent of our nation's capital."
Wow.
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 But it's true. I'm telling you, anytime you get on 295 and you're right there by MLK,
Oh man.
so if you know, in any community, MLK is like close to the
Right.
hood, right?
And I'm good on any MLK Boulevard.
But it's like you smell it. It's like, oh my God, I got a contact high. I don't even like taking that way anymore, because it's like it's in there. I'm like, are they literally growing it on the interstate?
Right. Well, you know what though, Roz? In some places it may be a farm back in the cut, because I think they got a couple of farms that they have legal, or they have signed off on for the state of Maryland, if I'm not mistaken. And right over in that area, it borders Maryland.
Yeah.
I know I was up in Boston and there was a marijuana plant down the street from the hotel we were staying in. I was like, that's why it was so strong in the air like that.
Well, you know what? That might be true. I didn't even think about that. I was like, it's just a whole bunch of people out here chiefing. Good Lord. Like,
That too.
the contact high was ridiculous. It was crazy, crazy, crazy. But thank you for bringing that point up, because we do self-medicate a lot in our community, but I don't think it's ever been labeled as self-harm. And in such a suicidal ideation, it is like a slow death, because eventually it is going to kill you. Your body is not going to be able to manage all that.
That's right. And I think that part of the issue with labeling it as self-harm is because so many of us do it. And it would almost be self-indicting,
Right.
to put it out there in those terms. But I'm of the sort, you've known me long enough, Roz, since undergrad, when going 2 parties a week. So my evolution and what I've grown from. And
Yeah.
I think that it's time for us to we gotta shoot straight, when we're talking about this stuff, because we're talking about our future.
Yeah.
And the enemy is ramping it up on them and making it
Mm.
more accessible, making it more popular. I'm still listening to hip hop. And I'm listening to the lyrics and I'm hearing the message that they're telling our kids. Like, I know it's not this show, but it is a part of mental health and mental wellness. There's a song right now, I think it's Cry Baby, by the baby or Lil Baby and Megan Thee Stallion with him. And he has a line in there. He said, she's so fine, I'm gonna hit it raw. So basically he's promoting, unprotected sex. And it's just one line and it's very quick. But I'm listening to it like a kid would, and that's the new thing. Oh, she's so fine. Oh, I'm bad. I'm so bad. You don't need one of them. And it's like, that ain't what those two don't equate.
Right.
But
Right.
lyrics like that, where it's becoming very popular, these self-destructive and self-harming behaviors.
And it is I don't even recognize music these days. I'll just be honest and say that I'm like, half the stuff I can't even listen to. But you bring up a very great point, that it's in our music, it's in Fortnite, it's in all these things that our kids are playing or in tune with. And it's a constant battle to try to get them to see that that's not the norm. You know, I don't drink, like I don't smoke. And I never have, and people look at me like I'm crazy, like, what? You never partake in? I'm like, no. Why? Because I had a roommate who used to get it in, and I would be afraid, you know, when we were leaving, that she wouldn't be able to get herself home. So it was just like I had to make sure she got home. So I was always known when we were in college and we used to go to Grand Central Station on Wednesdays, I would always be the designated driver because I was like, nope, we're gonna get home safely. Like I'm not putting my life, you know, chancing my life with that. But you know, back to you, LaTerrence, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the things that you were seeing in you know, the religious community? Because it is a constant battle for mental health providers, for people who are overly religious, to understand that they need to be in therapy and that therapy heals.
Excuse me.
Yeah, I can, let me see. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You hear me? Yeah, I can relate to that because I fashion myself an African liberation theologian more so than I am a doctrinalist. I'm not a doctrinalist. I don't subscribe to specific religious doctrine. I think one of the problems with the African American community is that we have become so spiritual that we don't listen to practical advice. There's a African proverb that says, "Do not stand in the place of danger, trusting in miracles." I'm not saying that miracles don't happen. Miracles do happen, but you cannot stay in a place of danger thinking that God's going to come and just miraculously deliver you from that particular situation. If you're in a pack of lions and you just stand there waiting for something to happen to deliver you from that situation, I'm not going to say what I think you are, but you are that. Okay, you have to take some action, and I think that a problem with most African American Christian folk, and you know my journey is a little bit more broader than Christianity. I was a member of the Nation of Islam for a few years, so I have a very eclectic religious experience. But growing up a Christian and now being a practicing elder in the Baptist Church, I think what happens is sometimes we get preached to and not taught. The Bible says that we should, you know, with all you're getting, get understanding. And a lot of times I think there's a lack of understanding in terms of the biblical text and what the Bible is actually trying to say to you, because you find preachers sometimes, and I'm not, you know, berating any specific preacher, but you find preachers sometimes, they'll take text and they'll preach it out of context, and people miss the actual meaning. An old preacher told me one time, all preaching ain't hollering and all hollering ain't preaching. And what you'll find in the Black church, sometimes you get a whole lot of hollering and people leave happy, but they haven't learned anything about what the Bible says. And so I think that's what we miss the mark sometimes, is that people are not taught that even in praying, and I believe in prayer. Prayer is essential. You have to pray if you have a relationship with God. I'm not saying that that everyone does have that relationship, but if you subscribe to any religious construct, you know, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, whatever the case may be, prayer, meditation, whatever you want to call it. All that stuff is essential. But in praying, there's sometimes that you have to act. Okay, and I'll illustrate. In the Bible, everybody knows the story. There's a blind man. The Bible says Jesus comes upon this blind man, him and his disciples, right? And the man was blind from birth. And the disciples asked him, Rabbi, what did this man do that he was born blind? Did he sin or did his parents sin? Right? I'm gonna fast forward because I'm trying to illustrate something. So they asked, was he born blind because somebody in his family sinned or because he sinned? Jesus said, no, it's not that he sinned or that his family sinned. The purpose was that there was a miracle that was going to happen that was going to exhibit the power of God. But if you know the story, the Bible says Jesus bent down and he spat on the ground. Am I right about it? He spat on the ground and he made a mud pie, okay? And he placed it on the blind man's eyes, all right? Now, if you know anything about Jesus, most of the time that Jesus effected miracles, all he had to do was speak, and it was, okay? But in this case, Jesus did something physical. He placed the mud pie on the guy's eyes, right? Then he told him to what? He told him to what? Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. What's my point? My point is that there's sometimes that you have to do something after you pray.
Mhm.
All right. You can pray to God and God will tell you what you need to do. All right. But you have to do said thing. All right. So what is it? What as it relates to mental health? All right. Say you have a mental health issue. All right. And you know that you have a problem. You ask God to deliver you from said problem. Well, God may tell you to go to see Dr. Jeff. God may tell you to go see J.M. Armstrong. Well, you have to do those things, because had the man not gone to the pool of Siloam and washed his eyes, the Bible doesn't say this, but I'm sure that had he not done that, the miracle would not have been effective. So my point is that sometimes even in prayer, even in asking God to do something for you, many times you have to do something for yourself. God placed these men here, J.M. Armstrong and Dr. Jeff, to do something, right? You have to use the people that God has placed in your life to get what you want from God sometimes.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic, because
Yeah.
I'm constantly fighting that battle with people who are like, God didn't tell me to do it, so I ain't gonna do it. Okay.
That's because they're not listening. That's why.
I was going to say that. I was going to say that people haven't been trained to listen for the voice of God. They're so used to hearing the voice of pastor and whoever it is that's preaching, that we forget that, God speaks directly, and we don't recognize the signs. What's the story? It's not biblical or anything, but the person was stuck in the river praying, and a piece of driftwood came by, and then I don't know, a crocodile came by with his mouth tied up, so it couldn't bite. And then the boat and the person, God said, I sent you 3 times, and you never jumped on.
Yeah.
And so that's basically what I'm thinking happens with us a lot of times. And one of my contentions with, because I'm ordained as well, and and as well as being initiated into several, African spiritual traditions. So I'm eclectic like you,
I am
brother.
too.
And it's like
I'm a Geechee guy, man. So
so it's in your blood. You got that root work. But what I think happens is that I acknowledge that our current, church leadership, specifically speaking, is often the descendant of people who were taught by people who were taught by people who were taught by slave masters.
Exactly.
How it is for us to recognize God, and then how to interact with God and how to worship God. And to me, that creates a liability that we've been dealing with for generations. And the context that I understand generational curses through is the fact that not only can you choose to do something on your own, but somebody could literally insert a generational curse into your bloodline. By literally, make you lose your job, however they choose to do that, and then set up a crack house right next door, and somebody offer you a bump. Now you just introduced, crack cocaine into somebody's household and into their lineage, and everybody in there is affected by that, and everybody that comes from everybody who's in there is going to be affected by that as well. And I think that when we take that active perspective on what generational curses are, many of which are directly related to mental health issues, whether they create the mental health issue or were rendered susceptible because of mental health issues, those curses can be slid right in on us. And when I look at, our inability to hear God, as a faith community, I don't care what your faith is, it's across the board. I think that it's because somewhere our understanding of God was disrupted intentionally, and it was replaced by empty calorie of sorts, so we can eat it, it can taste good. Like you said, they leave feeling happy because those are those endorphins. You get that organ going with that, with the word,
with the drum.
That's scientific. And I just think that some of our training that we've lost hold of still exists in some of these other traditions, the African traditions. And when you can wed that worldview and that perspective and that experience with, our modern expression of Christianity or Islam or whatever it is, or Judaism even, then what we have is that art wedded back to the science. And then we have a whole entity again that we literally have practical instructions that we can move with and utilize. And so that prayer and that meditation becomes healing. It is literally a healing balm. When Jesus shows up and says, I can cure your blindness, we don't hesitate to drop to our knees. We don't say, he's spitting the soil. We say, spit some more, brother.
Spit some more. Can I get some more?
That one, is that you sure that's wet enough?
Yeah.
But it's real.
But that's powerful, though, brother. I like that you. I didn't know that you had that background, and that's powerful. But like I said, I fashion myself a Black liberation theologian. I don't subscribe to certain things that I've learned in seminary. But the Bible tells us that, to envy not the oppressor and choose none of his ways. I think we've chosen too many ways of oppressor. We've adapted too many of those ways. And so we have to go back and reevaluate the text, the scriptures, the Torah, the Quran, all those books of God, and apply them to what makes us be. You understand what I'm saying? And I think we fail to do that sometimes. And I find that, as you said, that's a good point, that some of these preachers have been taught by, preachers from, we back in my hometown in Brunswick, Georgia, we call them jackleg preachers. They have no training, they have no educational background. And I'm not saying that you have to have that, because the spirit does have a play. But at the same time, when you're trying to teach people what the Word of God says, and then when you're trying to re-educate and help people unlearn things that they have learned the wrong way, you have to have a background that facilitates that.
Right. And I like to say that's why conversations like this are so important, right?
Mm-hmm.
As African Americans, we are not monolithic in the way that we think, act, move, and understand the world around us. But I think it's incumbent on each one of us basically to be able to reach back, right? To reach back in our communities and show and instruct and teach people, that it's important for us. And also scriptures talked about study to show ourselves approved.
Approved and workmen need not be ashamed. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's incumbent on us to seek out that knowledge, but it's also incumbent on us as I consider myself a carer. People ask what I do. Basically, I'm a carer, in the mental health realm.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's incumbent that we have these conversations and we reach back and we educate our people, right? And we have these discussions. So Dr. Roz, again, kudos for you for doing this. This is powerful, right?
Thank you. And I'm happy that I chose you three for this panel, because although you're alike, but you do have very different things about you. Jay, I want to pivot to you for a second, because I'm getting this question because there are a lot of parents who are struggling with their kids because of this pandemic. What are some signs should they be looking out for their children, and when should they reach out for help?
Yeah. Well, I like I said, I am getting a lot of calls from parents, single mothers. And obviously one of the overarching signs is anger, right? Withdrawal, right? When you start talking about depression, some of the signs to look for are when a young man no longer has any enjoyment or engages in those things that he used to enjoy. If he used to shoot hoop with his boys, basically, he doesn't really have an interest in doing that anymore. He becomes more sullen or withdrawn, basically. So those are some of the things to look for. I have also found that, we talked about substance abuse earlier. We're having a lot of young men who are increasingly using vaping devices, with THC, basically getting high, getting liquor, access to liquor, and even pills. So you're having a lot of substance abuse, basically, and I tell a lot of my parents that, you can get a 7 to 12 panel drug kit at CVS. I'm a real big believer in random drug testing. My son, he is random drug tested. Right? One of the best, he knows it. And I think it's one of the best things we could do for preventative, being proactive in that. So, just to be in tune with your children, engage with your children, talk to your children, right? Observe how they move, how they interact with them, with their peers, with you. If they become increasingly isolating, that's something that's something that parents need to be aware of. So I think the biggest takeaway is just, encouraging parents to really be intentional and observing, of their children and talk to them, And so those are some of the things that I talk to my parents about.
Can I say something real quick? I told you the story before, and I think one of the last Zooms we had. I do have mental health issues. I'm a combat veteran, 22 years in the United States Marine Corps, Operation Iraqi Freedom, initial invasion, and to JM's point, it's all about observation. You have to watch your children, because the same things that apply to grown men would apply to children also. Because one of the things that I realize is that I was in denial that I had an issue. I didn't think that I had a problem. I was doing exactly what Jeff was talking about. I was self-medicating. I was drinking overly much, trying to deal with the depression, the anxiety, all those things that were a result of that experience. And but what happened to me was I retired from the Marine Corps, started teaching high school math and coaching football and track. And I would go to work every day, teach, coach, come home. But I was extremely hypervigilant. I could not sleep. I would stay up to like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, start all over again. Fast forward. Well, that went on for about 4 years post-retirement. But one day, based on observation, I came home and my wife and my children were at the dining room table, and they did an intervention. They were like, hey, you need to sit down. I'm like, sit down for what? Dinner's ready? What's going on here, right? And no, you need to sit down. We need to talk. And what happened was they said, look, you have some issues. There's something wrong with you. But I didn't recognize there was anything wrong with me. I thought I was okay. But I didn't see the verbal outbursts, the excessive drinking, all of those things, the things that were impacting my family. But when they actually sat down at the table with me and said, look, here are your two choices. Either you go see a doctor or we're leaving. Well, I chose to go see a doctor because family's important. And but as JM was saying, it's all about observation. If people start to change, their actions are different. They're not responding the same way that they normally do. They're not doing the same things they used to do. I think that's one of the first things that you can do in terms of determining whether or not somebody has an issue.
Thank you for sharing your story. I wasn't going to bring it up. I wanted you to. So I'm glad that you did, and that you're so open about it, and that we laugh about it on Facebook sometimes. You're like, I need to take my medication, but
I need to take my meds real. Real.
but it's a real thing for you. And I think that the way that you handle it and the way that you talk about it, you've encouraged other of our friends who are on Facebook and my Marriage Exposed group. They're able to open up and say, I'm dealing with this as well, because they're hearing it from someone else and they know that they're not alone.
But the Bible says that we're encompassed by a cloud of witnesses. And although I do it in a funny way, I'm serious about it. I'm letting them know that, look, I really do have issues. And one of the things that I see with Christian folks sometimes is that we try to act like we've always been saved, like we came out the womb saved, and that we never had any issues, never had any problems. I don't have any problem telling you I had problems. I still have issues, but I know Yeshua. For you bougie Black folk, that's Jesus. but I have an experience with God, and I know that I believe in God's providence. I believe in deliverance, and I think that what we're doing here, for example, iron sharpens iron. We have to share our experiences, because there's someone out there that needs to hear your story. Absolutely. There's someone out there that needs to know that God can do what God says He will do. Okay. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to even project as being perfect. You just have to tell the story.
And I think that's where I think that's why we struggle, because we don't tell our story. Because I love my parents, but I remember growing up hearing, what goes on in this house, stay in this house, and that could be because we lived on military bases too. So, that had a lot to do with, if you know anything about military life, that had a lot to do with my dad's ranking and, just things with him in the military. So like, I conceivably understand that. But the reality is that is a message, that is a theme throughout all African-American families that I've seen. And because of that, we aren't saying that we're hurting. We aren't saying that we have this issue. We're keeping it all bottled in, and then we explode, and we don't know what to do about it. I wanted to pick you, Dr. Jeff, because you're working with college students, and as all of us know as mental health professionals, that's when most people have their first mental health break, when they go off to college, because mom and dad's not around. They're kind of on their own. They got to make their own decisions. And it's it can be a scary place if they're not in a welcoming environment. That's why I always say I love Fisk University, because the family unit, like your friends weren't going to let you slip. You know what I mean? So if you were doing something that you weren't supposed to do, your friends would check you. But that's not every school. So what would you say to that young Black male who may be experiencing his first moments of feeling like something's not right, but doesn't know what to do?
Specifically in the college setting?
Yeah.
All right, real quick, I want to ask there's an iPhone user on here that's not on mute, and we're getting some feedback from that person.
Oh, I called him. Thank you.
Right, sis. So yeah, at the first indication, whether within yourself or one of your homies, if you see something ain't right, you fit sensing in yourself, or you, like we were talking about earlier, observe it in one of your homeboys. One of the first things to do is to tap into whatever open lines of communication that you have. And that means to talk to somebody about it, whether that's a support system from back home, because it should just be a phone call away, or the support system that you have already built, your network on campus. So if you are a member of any type of social club, any type of organization, if you have a faculty advisor, if you have a favorite professor, because as a professor, we're always there for our students. And, you might not get the quickest response when you're trying to sell an excuse of why you ain't turning your paper. But, if you send us that email that says, I'm not feeling well and I really need to talk to somebody, you almost always get responded to immediately, in that context. And so what I'm just going to echo what you all have already said is, reach out to somebody. If you are the one observing the difference in behavior in one of your friends, reach out to them. Let's check them out in a non-judgmental way, because so much of what we have right now is we've stigmatized, illness on the mental level. And so, and that's one of the main missions for Taraji P. Henson's organization, is to destigmatize, the seeking of mental health, to destigmatize, the existence and the suffering from mental illness. And so, you reach out to your homies if you see something's different in a non-judgmental way. It's kind of like a mental health check-in, and you can cite. And what's the beautiful thing right now, though, Roz, is that so many celebrities, began to come out with their own stories. And that's going to really help the younger generations, because now they're like, cool, okay, so it's not just me. And not only is it not just me, but it's also that very famous, that very well-known person who I always see that looks like they have it together. And they're telling me that behind the scenes, they're actually suffering with depression, or, they at some point in time, they may have been suicidal. And so it's encouraging, to have especially more Black men coming forward. And, Charlamagne is one of the ones that I know stood out the most.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, D-Nice and somebody else is about either just recently had a conversation about Black men's mental health, or they're about to. And so, it's a wonderful thing that's taking place, because the conversation is being had. But if you're feeling off a little bit, have that conversation, and don't be against seeking professional help, by way of a counselor or a psychologist. And what I have to say about that is that, all psychologists and counselors aren't built the same, it's just the reality of it. And so if you can, if you're a Black male, try to find you a Black male psychologist, if you can, a Black male counselor. And the saying is, to all skin folk and my kinfolk. But even within that pool of us and them, you still have to be discerning.
I like that.
You have to be discerning, and to recognize that this person still might not be a good fit for me. Because one thing that I dislike this, and is that we don't necessarily have to go through anything other than intellectual training to become counselors and psychologists. And I always lean on my folks, my brothers of the cloth. I'm like, you went through dentist, you go to dental school, you come out a dentist. You go through medical school, you come out a medical doctor. You go to divinity school, don't necessarily mean you come out divine. And so
that's true.
Because again, it's mostly an intellectual process, and that word divinity is very powerful. But some people really think because they got an MDiv, they come out as a master of divinity. I'm like, not for real. But it's the same thing on the psychological side of the game. And for those who don't know, I was headed to divinity school if I didn't choose to go for psychology degree. And, it was a toss-up between the two. But then as a student of psychology, I learned that psychology literally means the study of the soul. And so I was like, I'm in the right place anyway, so it worked. I don't have to put the hot robe on, unless it's graduation. But when you look at you know, the whole thing about stigma, when you look at, you know, this whole notion of going through psychological training, it does not guarantee that you come out on the other side psychologically healthy. And what I often say is that those of us that went the path of mental health, you know, to learn about mental health, and especially the advanced degrees, we did it to help to address our own issues before we go out there to help other people. Like I always say, put your mask on first, right? And what happens is many of us, we end up getting seduced by the external. That's what I call that, is when you're able to give some good advice to somebody, you got some success with certain clients, you start popping your collar, and you know, you forget to finish pulling that stuff from up under your bed. You know, you forget to start, you keep all that junk under your bed, and you start letting it spill over, and you start stuffing it in the closet, and you know, your bags start getting heavy, your car starts getting junky, you start forgetting to process your own stuff because you're seduced by your ability to help other people. Say all that to say is that, so when a young brother is seeking out mental health, you know, just like on any job interview, you're interviewing the counselor as well. And so they're throwing you a whole bunch of questions and all trying to dig into your mind. Any counselor that's worth their weight and their degree is going to be able to answer the same questions that you're asking them. Yeah. Of course, professionally, we're taught to keep up certain boundaries, and you know, it ain't nothing more defensive than a psychologist or a psychiatrist getting questioned, though. We got to be in control, right? But what I'm saying is that for a young brother, be okay asking questions.
Right.
And if the person is offended, like if you want to know, so what are your thoughts about, you know, if you're going for relationship counseling, you know, you want to ask that counselor, what are your thoughts on relationships? And tell me your relationship philosophy, you know, because they might have a philosophy and they might be ready to bury you in this session, you know, because their philosophy might be anti everything that you stand for.
Right.
And so it's okay to be, in fact, I encourage you to be discerning when you're entering those rooms. You want to find out who this is working with you. You want to see what their style is and see if it resonates with you. Now, my last statement is that if you go in there and you feel uncomfortable with the person, that's not the indication to run. Because sometimes, you know, that discomfort is like the surgeon's scalpel. You know, you get numb, so you don't have to feel it. But, you know, it's the same process. We got to cut in there and get some of that stuff out of there. But you do feel it once you wake up and that anesthesia wears off. It's just that we don't use anesthesia, you know, and so you feel that pain as you're walking through it. And to feel that pain as you're walking through it, it's just a reminder of what you went through to get to where you are. So don't run from discomfort, but discern who it is that you're choosing to trust your soul with. Because again, a psychologist is supposed to be somebody working on your soul. We call it a mind now. We try to localize it in the brain, but it's still your soul. And that's what we're actually working on.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hey, to add to Jeff's point, my wife and I had that exact experience. We started out with the M folk, the mother folk initially. And, you know, just me being me, I guess I ran a game on her, so she tended to take my side. And my wife was seeing that she was taking my side as opposed to her side. And after a few visits, my wife said, no, we can't do her anymore. And ultimately, we ended up with an African-American male counselor. And I tried to run the same game on him. And he called me on it. He's actually a retired Marine himself. And he's like, look, bro, stop with the bullshit. You know, can I say that on here? He just stop with the BS. But like Jeff said, sometimes you have to find someone who looks like us to have a more effective process, because that's exactly what happened to us, because she was not working for my wife. And ultimately, we found someone who we found some skin folk, and it worked out all right.
And, you know, to Jeff's point, I'm glad that you brought up that, you know, that first visit may not be a good fit for you, because a lot of people would just go one time and be like, I tried and it didn't work. And I always tell people that finding a therapist is like finding the perfect shoe. You got to keep
going there.
Yeah, gotta keep trying them on until you find the one that works for you. You know, because we are so easy to say, well, I tried.
Right.
You know, and we'll use that excuse. That therapist didn't do this, or that therapist didn't do that. That therapist wasn't listening to me. But we are all called to give referrals if we know that we cannot help a client. So I would say this: if you do try to, you know, meet with a therapist and it doesn't go well, or you don't feel as if this therapist is going to be meaning for you, ask for a referral. It's okay. We don't get offended. We won't be offended.
We shouldn't get offended, but and don't worry about that.
Yeah, don't even worry about offending us, because if it's just not a perfect, you're right, we shouldn't get offended, but some do, but we shouldn't, because the truth of the matter is that we want you to heal.
Right.
You know, we want you to heal. I like, Jay, that you said that you are a carer. I like to call myself a healer.
Yeah.
Like I'm here to heal, because at the end of the day, and this is going into my next point, we have so much trauma in our community that we don't know what everything is chaotic, and we're functioning in it
Yeah.
because it's our norm. It has become so normalized for trauma to occur. I was before I hung up with you, I was working with some clients, and just listening to his perspective, it was like, that is all laced in trauma.
Mhm.
Like, that has nothing to do with the situation that you are currently in right now.
Yeah.
All of that is the trauma of your past. And so I like to hear from each one of you what your thoughts are about helping Black men recognize, helping Black men and boys recognize what trauma looks like and how to heal from the trauma.
Yeah.
I know it's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a relevant one. And, you know, and I was talking to a friend of mine, and, you know, I think it was right after the George Floyd murder. I was watching the news, and I was watching, I want to say it was a MSNBC, and Van Jones was on, and he was actually recapping, you know, the trial, and he was talking about it. And you brothers may have seen this, but the brother got emotional just talking about it, right? And here, and I can remember thinking, he does this for this. He is a consummate. He's a professional, right? He does this for a living. But what he was doing was experiencing that trauma. He was traumatized, basically. He was responding to that trauma in front of a live viewing audience, and that's powerfully significant, right? So, you know, not only are we dealing with the trauma that comes with being Black in this world, basically, and on top of that, then there's COVID. To your point, Rosa, we're seeing this happen and play out right in front of our eyes, time and time and time again. So, in essence, we're re-traumatized over and over and over again. And if you don't think this is something that's significantly impactful to our psyche and our emotional health, then you're mistaken. So a lot of times I'll tell a lot of my clients, you know what? Turn off the TV. We've done it in my household. Okay. Not that we turn a blind eye, right? Because if you turn off your TV, then guess what? You're going to see it on your smartphone. You turn off your smartphone, basically, you log on to your web browser, it's going to be there anyway, right? So we have to learn how to sometimes just disconnect. Disconnect, okay? Stay engaged, but disconnect. Because it's and I like to give the other brothers their thoughts on that, how the media and the constant news cycle, right? How that plays into this sort of re-traumatization, right? Because a lot of the guys that come to my office, a lot of men, I've had clients tell me, Jay, I had to turn off the TV, right? Or I wake up and I'm angry sometimes, I don't know why. I went off on my boss basically because they asked a question and I flew off the handle, right? Or they said made a comment basically and it was incendiary and they didn't know how to respond, right? So what do you brothers think about that? So this you know this concept of being re-traumatized.
Go ahead, bro.
Go ahead, brother Young.
You know, it's funny that you brought up the what's his name, Van Jones incident. And one of the things that came to my mind as I was just thinking about what I would say from a biblical perspective as it relates to this forum, I went to John 11:35. And the Bible says in John 11:35, it says, Jesus wept. We as Black men, or as men in general, but since we're talking about Black men here, we come from a background whereby we're told that it's not okay to cry. You know, it's not okay to display emotion unless it's anger. You know, because we exist in that type of environment. But the Bible says that Jesus wept. What does that mean? I mean, it means it's okay to be sensitive and to cry.
Absolutely.
If you have something going on, it's okay to get that thing out. Okay. It's okay to let the emotions out. It's okay to not be ashamed of what's going on in your life. We all have issues. We all have problems. We all have, as the brother was saying earlier, we all have generational curses that we have nothing to do with, you know, because mama did this, granddaddy did that. Now I'm suffering the outcome, you know, but it's okay to cry. And so many times we hold our pain in because we've been told that we're not supposed to do X, Y, or Z. I've learned to cry. I may not cry in a certain situation, but I've learned to cry when I have the opportunity to cry, because it's, what's the word I'm looking for? It's, come on, doctors.
Cathartic.
Yeah, that's it. See, I'm an old dumb Marine and I'm Omega. So, it's cathartic. But it's okay to cry. And I love it, you know, when, in that instance, when Jesus cried, he cried because people were mourning, right? And they were broken, and they were moved by, he was moved to tears because of the situation. And I think in that particular story, he's talking about Lazarus having died, right? And at that moment, he wept. Jesus felt something. And so it's okay for us as men to feel. It's okay for us to let those things out, because if you don't let those things out, eventually they're going to come out in another form. You know what I mean? Whether it be anger or violence, or whatever the case may be. And a lot of us have trauma that we don't realize that we have. And I'm just speaking experientially, trauma that we don't realize that we have until we look back at it retrospectively. And you wonder why I'm doing X, Y, and Z. And you look back to your life and you say, that's why I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Absolutely. But it's okay to once you realize that it's not all your fault, it's okay to cry about that thing, you know, and let the pain go. That's been very, very cathartic for me in terms of realizing that it's all right to not be what somebody else says a man is supposed to be. I'm just going to be me.
It's interesting though, Brother Young, because as you know, as a warrior, you know, you're a warrior, quote unquote, retired. You know, but, you know, the warrior never goes anywhere. But you know, there's a specific context within which, you know, you are. I guess you're. It's better for you to mourn and express emotion in certain contexts, better than certain contexts than others. Right. You know, so like in the midst of battle, you know, you have to be hardcore. You have to be, you know, stonewalled in that moment. And I think that what happens is that we don't get that next moment to process and release.
Exactly.
And I think that's part of the problem. And I attribute that to that whole notion of stoicism. You know, the whole being stoic, which comes out of, you know, the Greco-Roman ideology, Marcus Aurelius being the main champion for it. You know, but what happened before that, what predated stoicism, was a concept called men ed, you know, in East Africa, specifically in ancient Egypt. And men is stability, and ed is the heart. And it talks about having movement with a stable heart. And when you move with a stable heart, it's not the suppression of your emotional state. It's actually an elevation beyond being led by your emotions. You elevate to a level of mastery of your emotions. So that way, you know, the emotions aren't there to be bottled up. You know, they're like animals that you're taming. You know, you see a person walking a dog without a leash, and that dog follows every command. That's a dangerous dog right there. You know, that's more dangerous than that dog that's on a leash trying to pull and get away. You know, it's because this one is trained, and it's just a matter of choice about what this one is going to do next. And I think that whole stoicism piece, and just like in true Western fashion, we fragment everything and we actually lose the substance of it, but we keep the appearance of it. And so stoicism and mid-ed were those processes for mastering emotions, not suppressing them, not denying them, but making them so that they are what they are, which are poor leaders, but great servants. You know, and so many of the Bible stories, like they act like Jesus was mad. Jesus wasn't mad. You know, when he was flipping them tables and letting loose the doves and chopping tables in half and stuff, my man wasn't mad. He was beyond getting mad. But he understood the language of the people he was talking to. These are hustlers and thieves and money changers and all that stuff. You don't care nothing about, you know, the temple. You know, they didn't have no respect for the temple. So he said, I can't go in here talking about some peace. Please stop selling in my father's house. No, they understood damaged goods and profit loss. So he had to
go ahead, preach, brother.
And so, you know, I told you where I was headed if I ain't go for psychology. But what you have in that, and I think that a lot of times that story is misrepresented. As you said earlier, Brother Young, it's told out of context. You know, we don't elevate Jesus to the status of a master and the initiate that he actually was. Right? When he disappeared at 12 years old and showed back up at 30, you know, those 18 years he was teaching and learning in the temples. That was the last place his parents peeped him. When he got away from them, that's where they found him. He was in there teaching and learning. And my understanding of that is that the elder masters saw him and they said that kid got promise. And they brought him in the fold and they started schooling him on those spiritual sciences that would
Right.
eventually help him to evolve into his Christhood, which is where he didn't have those passions. He subdued his passions. And that's why the devil could tempt him 3 times and lose every time. So those don't exist no more for me.
Exactly.
But I think that we missed that process of controlling and mastering our emotions.
Right.
And because we missed that, we're taught to suppress it. Because an uncontrolled emotional state can be equally as dangerous as a dammed up emotional state.
Exactly.
And so we're around a bunch of people who are not initiated. And so people don't know how to train us to properly express. And so I think that that's a part of that. My brother, just to answer your question specifically though, about the media, I was sitting on a dissertation at Howard just last Thursday. Sister Howard did a dissertation on exposure to police violence. And, she wanted to see certain things and how it interacted with other variables. One of the things she talked about was anticipatory racism, which is a concept of anticipating racist experiences. And one of my former professors, who was actually on the committee as well, asked the question, so are you talking about anticipatory racism as a state or a trait or a personality trait? And the difference between the two is, as a personality trait means that you're constantly anticipating racism. It's a part of who you are. And that could come off a bit paranoid. It could have anxiety and things of that nature, increased depression because you're feeling victimized. And if it's a state, it means that you elevate into a state of awareness to where you're anticipating something to happen. And so as a part of, and so what I did is I tied that into the spirituality. I had a situation, and long story short, I was ending a meeting. It was a very, politically charged meeting, and I was one of the speakers at this meeting. And as I was leaving, I meditate a lot. I learned to listen to the voice of God. So God whispered in my ear, is God or my ancestors, they one and the same to me. And God is like the ultimate ancestor.
Right.
Come from. So it whispered in my ear like, hey, you getting pulled over today on your way home or tonight. I said, cool, thanks for the heads up. I'm riding up Georgia Avenue and showing up 3 cars behind. I see them. I was like, all right, there you go. They was hunting. I felt the energy. Long story short, one got right behind me, hit the lights. I tried to get over to the right. Another one speed up and block me from being able to get over. So this is the anticipatory racism. I knew it was coming. And it's a state of heightened awareness coupled with the emotional control. And I don't allow those videos and those instances to pump fear into me. And I don't allow it to create a state of anxiety within me. So now I'm thinking, oh my God, they're going to get me like they got George Floyd. And I'm like, no, I ain't George Floyd. If I'm gonna be masterful in this whole interaction and in this whole engagement. Long story short, they came up. I got, gave my lights, everything, rolled down both windows. I got out of there scot-free. Apparently, obviously I lived. But what I tell the people who are watching those videos and who are being constantly exposed, I tell them to dial that back a bit, because we don't have that emotional disposition to be able to tolerate that and to endure those things without coming out on the other end hard. Now, if we were training our youth to master their emotional state, and then to also understand that you have to filter that stuff from coming into your temple, you have to filter that and watch it with a certain perspective, understand that, these things are purposely being shown. I mean, a large number of the footage is actually coming from the police themselves. If you really think about it, it's body cam footage that they released. And so, and in my book, Practical Psychology, I talk about, there's 3 possible outcomes on that in those shooting situations. One, the whole thing is fake. The victim and the actor and the aggressors are all paid actors, right? That's one outcome. And I wouldn't doubt that some of the situations are actually that. 2, the officer is the actor, but the victim is real. It was staged. They wanted to get this footage and record to pump fear. And then the third one is, of course, it's an actually real and authentic situation where the victim is real. It's a real traffic stop or whatever, and the cop just acted a fool and killed this person. Right? I said it could be one of those 3 things, but I teach people to watch it with that filter and with that lens, with that type of critical mind, so that they are analyzing it. They're not just a passive recipient of it. They're paying attention to the details. There was a video of a cop holding down a Black woman on the expressway. I paused it. I said, you see all that ink on his arm and his forearm? Wouldn't it be nice if the police officers investigated the tattoos on their own officers to see what their affiliations are, just like they would a suspect they apprehended to see if he's gang affiliated? So when you turn it into a critical thinking exercise and an active analysis, then you're no longer just passively being forced along the lines that the people showing it to you may be wanting to force you down. And then my last point, because we're talking about social media, and Raj, you may know this, but they changed from the DSM-4 TR to the DSM-5. And for those that don't know, the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. It's like it's the clinician's Bible,
I
right?
keep
And
my
it's
little
what
desk reference right
you got
here,
your
right
desk
by me.
Got it.
I got mine is down there, so I got a huge joint. I got the hardback joint.
Yeah, this, yeah, it's my
Big one.
little desk reference.
But what happens is that, you know, it tells us how to diagnose any and all mental illnesses, right?
Mhm.
And going from the 4TR into the 5, they changed the diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, which is what we're talking about, trauma, right?
Mhm.
And one of the significant changes that they made was they you no longer vicarious or indirect experiencing of it no longer impacts you, according to the DSM, and specifically through social media. Now, it can be indirect if you're related to a person, if it's a family member, right? But if it's not a family member, it don't count anymore.
Mhm.
And if it is through social media or through TV, unless it's a part of your job, you also can't count that as a stressor, a direct stressor. Now,
Wow.
to me, what does this do? What it does is it's going to decrease the likelihood of a person being diagnosed with PTSD,
Absolutely.
Yes.
and which then hinders their ability to get the proper treatment
Right.
for PTSD, right? While at the same time ramping up our exposure to that type of trauma that
Right.
no longer counts as trauma towards the diagnosis for PTSD. It's a tangled web they weave when they conspire to deceive. I mean,
Absolutely.
this stuff is amazing to me. But again, if you can step back and see all these moving parts as one machine, this is one thing that's moving in concert right now, you know. And so when you can put that type of perspective into the young man's mind, you awaken that warrior in them, you know, because now they're on guard. At first, they didn't even know this stuff exists. Oh, man, you talking that conspiracy stuff. But when you can start showing and proving, it wakes up that natural survivor instinct.
Right.
And they go into analysis. And that's when you've equipped them. You've now taught them how to fish, right? They're not sitting and waiting on nothing. They're on it actively on their own. And I think that if you can get somebody into actively processing this stuff, because you're likely not going to be able to get them to shut it off. Like you said, it's on the TV, you turn TV off. It's on your smartphone, it's dumb things, right? And it's on your tablet, it's on whatever. And so you're not likely to get them to stop watching it. You're definitely not going to get them to stop showing it. It's going to turn into a reality show in a minute. It already is. It started with cops back in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And then it slowly started escalating, and more and more and more when it was testing the water. They say the way to boil a frog is to raise that temperature slowly. For my folks up in Maryland eating them crabs, you want to boil some crab? You got to slow boil them joints and put the lid on. And I think that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And if we're not paying attention, what's going to happen is that it's going to be just like that movie, The Running Man, where it's going to be a sport to where people sit back to intentionally watch people be slaughtered in this kind of way. So we got to get that analysis on and get our young brothers and sisters, and even some of us old ones, to start thinking about this stuff in a different way.
Brother, that was good. I love it.
Yep. Great points. I mean, I do think that's where we suffer because we do not teach critical thinking in our community. And I'm actually teaching a course this semester on critical thinking, and the way how surface level some of us, the collegiate students, how surface level we are.
Yes.
It's scary.
It is.
It's very scary. And then you think about, I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine raising a child. They get to their teenage years and then fearing that I teach them everything that they need to know, and then relying on God, help me out in this situation because I don't know if I did my best. Because if you don't know, right? So if you weren't taught, what are you sharing with your children? And I think we pass down trauma. It's kind of what you guys had mentioned before with the generational curses or whatever. We pass down trauma unknowingly.
Yeah, we do.
I always hate to hear when people say, I don't need anybody, I don't need no man, I don't need no girlfriends, no new friends. When I hear stuff like that, because you don't understand interpersonal relationships. And you don't know how to manage your interpersonal relationships. You have deficits in that area. So it's not that you don't need those people, because we need each other to survive. Let's be really honest about that. But it's the reality is that you've accepted the fact that you don't understand conflict resolution. You don't know how to get along with other people. And because it's been some kind of passed down trauma that you've seen in your family where they do emotional cutoffs, you think it's normal. And I think we just really have to get into a space of I'm glad we're doing this forum, and I'm so glad that all three of you readily said yes, that you would be available and that you would do it, because we are not having these meaningful, impactful conversations. And I think we have to. I think we absolutely have to, because whether we want to realize it or not, what just happened with this George Floyd case is about to change everything. Now that we know cops can go to jail for murder, I mean, think about the psychology of that. Think about how we were terrified on the day that the trial. I was texting back and forth with my Aunt June, who's on here, and we were watching the trial, and we were nervous about, what was coming in, what the verdict would be. But the fact that we had to be nervous about the verdict when we all saw that it was murder, it was very clear that it was murder. So I do think that we are in a space now where we need to be a little bit more proactive about, and not saying that we haven't been doing it, because I give a lot of props to Tamika Mallory and Black Lives Matter, all these people who are being activists for us. But I think as mental health professionals, we have to get on the front lines and talk about what this trauma is doing to us. And I was, as the verdict came in, I was watching like CNN and MSNBC, watching all the news channels, but not once was there a psychological expert on there to talk about the trauma of this and what this now means. Like you were saying, Van was having a very real lived experience. But because there were no mental health professionals on that panel with him, there was no dialogue about it. And that would have been a beautiful time for him to be able to have the dialogue of talking about what he's experienced in his life and why this means so much, and the trauma that police brutality has caused in our community. I'm not gonna lie to you, when I was watching that trial, I was extra nervous about my husband going to work. I'm like, they're gonna be on alert. I don't know what the police are gonna do. When the verdict had come in, it was like, they're gonna be mad at everybody. And then sure enough, at the time the verdict was being released, then we hear about the sweet baby in Ohio, Nakia Brown, who was shot dead. And I mean, the reality is that I don't understand why there has to be so much force when it comes to us as people of color.
Yeah.
And I understand that she had a weapon in her hand, but she could have been tased. She could have been subdued. There were other things that could have been done. So I think that we have to get in spaces of where we are having these conversations of becoming advocates. And I think we're trying to do it. But again, people don't want to recognize that mental health is really something that should be talked about. And that's the problem. So my question to you, final question of tonight, what more can we do as advocates for mental health to ensure that we are in those spaces, that we are advocating for our people? I'm gonna say for our people, for everybody, but for our people, because I mean, not that I'm not a racist, but I care about our people, because Black men are forgotten. There's so many things for women and girls, but there are not a lot of things for men and Black boys. And so how do we advocate for our boys? What can we do for our boys to ensure educationally that they're getting everything that they need? I'm constantly telling parents that I work with, when their son is getting expelled or suspended because he's acting up in school, and so he's been given this diagnosis of ADHD or ODD, and they're like, oh, my son just has a behavior problem. I was like, no, you need to do some further investigation. Tell me the symptomology, not the acting out, but what else are they doing? Because oftentimes, you guys know that ADHD and ODD mimics depression. But we don't know that in our community, and they don't know that because they don't care to know that about, and when I say that, you guys know who I'm speaking of. They don't care to know that about our community. They just have a problem child in their classroom that they want to get rid of, that they want out of their hair. So what are some things that we can do, and how can we get in spaces where we're actively advocating for our young boys, our young teenagers, and young Black men?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing. I am actually partnering with a couple of men in the community, one of which was recently ran for city district councilman. And we partnered with Simple, a local organization where I go in and I speak to middle schoolers and elementary school, 2 elementary schools. And I teach the young men and young boys there about emotional regulation, being aware of their emotions, being able to express their emotions, how to relieve anxiety, peer pressure, you know, social media, right? How to navigate in social media, you know, self-confidence, self-concepts. So I'm actively engaged in these schools and speaking to these young men, right? The agency I work for, Sound Living Counseling, we're having a program a Zoom program similar to this, where we're going to be talking, open forum, talking to people in the community, letting them know about mental health, about the resources that are available. So I think the key thing is just having the dialogue and then taking it to the people, taking it where we are, right? In the schools, in the churches, in my barbershop. I was in my barbershop this past Saturday, basically, you know, talking to a couple of brothers who, you know, we started out a conversation about, you know, hip hop and the generational differences, morphed into a conversation about mental health. So I think as mental health clinicians, as healers, as carers, you know, we take this conversation into where we live and breathe and operate. We talk to people, we talk to the homeboys, we talk to, you know, brothers at the barbershop, you know, we outreaching in our communities, in our churches, Pastor, you know, which I'm sure you do, you know, and in the schools. That's how we get that conversation started. Okay. And that's what I'm doing.
Thank you for all that you're doing.
A couple quick points, Roz.
Mhm.
Never apologize for putting you first. Never,
Right, right,
never do that. Because if
right.
we don't, who will? You know what I mean? So you ain't got to apologize for that, sis, especially not in this form. That's what we here for.
Yeah.
And you can't be a racist. So you ain't never got to lead with I'm not a racist, but you don't even have to worry about that one either, sis.
You know, they try to put that on us. You know,
Yeah,
they try to put that on us.
and we ain't got to accept it. So you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm a student of Mr. Fuller, Neely Fuller Jr. We used to bring him down to Fisk all the time. Him and Dr. Wells, and you know, they were like an aunt and uncle to me. Matter of fact, Mr. Fuller's last public speaking engagement was when I brought him down to Fisk when I was the assistant director of the Race Relations Institute. And he had his very last speaking engagement there at that conference. It was a Harambe conference. And, you know, long story short, you know, we ended up having to, you know, get him to a hospital. And Dr. Wells looked right at me. She said, Jeff, ride with Neely. So I'm riding in the ambulance with Mr. Fuller. And, you know, so I've soaked up so much game from him. I say all of that to say this. So, Roz, if they try to put that on you, you make them substantiate their claim before you defend anything.
Yeah.
You know, that's, I was going to law school, by the way, too, if I didn't do this other stuff. So if it's a claim, you know, they got to substantiate that or you ain't got nothing to say, you know, so that's just, you know, little life game. But on topic, though, I had to take some notes. On topic, the whole ADHD, ODD, you know, dynamic. I did all my work at Progressive Life Center, which is an African-centered social service agency in DC. I did all my clinical practicum and I did my externship and my internship there, you know, against the opinion of my, you know, my advisors and them. It was one in particular said I was going to go there because they weren't APA accredited, that I wouldn't get licensed later. I said, well, I'll cross that bridge when I get to it.
Yeah.
And there was also a white guy in my program from Canada, and he wasn't going to an APA site, and I caught wind of that, you know, so he was about to get out a year before everybody else. I'm like, well, shoot, me. I'm like, hashtag me too. I'm getting out too. And so he was my blocker, and I ran behind him. It's like, well, he's going back to Canada, so you know, he doesn't have to worry about it. So heck, I might be going back to Africa, and so they just had to fold. They didn't say anything. But anyway, the whole ADHD. So there, I was able to overturn a lot of diagnoses of ADHD because one of the things is that our children they don't necessarily have ADHD. I've had too many teachers when I was working as a school psychologist in DCPS come to me and say, hey, Jeff, we need this kid diagnosed with ADHD. They're cutting up in my class. I said, well, tell me what the diagnostic criteria is and I get right to it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. That's what you're supposed to do. I said, exactly. You know, that's my point. Exactly. And so when I would find a child that was labeled ADHD, specifically in the foster care system, I understood that this was contextual, especially because they only had to be medicated during the school year.
Right.
And so my little buddies would come to me and they said, you know, Mr. Jeff, before I got my doctor, Mr. Jeff, I don't feel good on this medicine. It made me feel like a zombie. I would explain to them, this is what you need to do to get you off this medicine. So over the summer, I'll teach you self-monitoring and, you know, and self-behavior modification techniques so that when the school year starts, I could buy you about a good month before you have to return your medicine. I'll tell them we got this agreement. And then we're going to watch you during this month, and we are going to prove to them that you don't need it anymore. And lo and behold, we would go through this process. I would train them and get them properly oriented. And I would overturn the diagnosis through a true assessment. And because they was in foster care, it ended up being adjustment disorder with mixed emotions.
Yes.
And so, and that's what it is, because they're in foster care,
Yeah.
you know, which means that they had a traumatic experience that they haven't yet adjusted to. It's taking, quote unquote, longer than expected to adjust.
Right.
And it just so happened to have these additional features to it. Right. And so with that, you know, I literally had psychiatrists trying to fight me, physically fight me, because that diagnosis is their baby, and every prescription that child is now on is coming under their pen. And I was just blowing the lid off of all of that. And so that whole ODD, ADHD thing, especially in the classroom, sometimes it's a function of the teachers, right? Absolutely. Sometimes it's a function of the class environment, but we don't never get a chance to go in there and evaluate the teacher. They just send us the kid. And Amos Wilson, he's an ancestor. He's one of the dopest psychologists ever.
Yeah.
He talks about how with our children in these contexts that we have to be out of our minds to get along in this system.
Right.
And so when they tell you that you're out of your mind, one of the first things you want to check to see is am I really, or am I just going against them trying to make me out of my mind? Right. And that's what I see a lot of times with our kids. They're the warrior spirits and they're being rebellious in this. And so, you know, what I say, how the best way to work with the kids and address them is for us to constantly and continually refine ourselves, so that anytime we're engaging anybody, especially our youth, we're presenting them with the best possible example of ourselves. We're presenting them with the most refined version of us, the most insightful version of us, so that no matter what they're coming to us for, they leave with the best possible thing that they can. And when you do it like that, you know, you're planting these seeds. And I had an elder, I used to keep the fire at his sweat lodge back in Nashville. And one of the Eddie George and Taj, they used to come to this sweat lodge all the time. It was in Mother Brunson's backyard. And what would happen is, by the way, he's the new football coach at TSU. Roz, did you hear that?
Yes, I heard.
I'm like, come on, Deion Sanders, Eddie George, Marshall Falk was supposed to be.
I love it.
If they start that trend, I'm like, man, get with it. 'Cause we've got some elite athletes that are retired who can mentor our boys and our girls in these programs. Sidebar. So the elder at the sweat lodge, he would always say, he said, you know, you can count the number of seeds in the apple, but you can never count the number of apples in a seed. And it's like, whoa. And so what we're doing is, when you plant that seed in a child by your mere presence, your refined state, you know, your insightful, you know, God attached and aware self, when you plant that seed in that child, you can never know how much that's going to multiply, right? And so you don't have to see the results now, but make that your intention when you're engaging children. You want to make sure that you can put the best possible thing in their mind, in their presence, that you possibly can in that moment. I think that's the absolute best way that we can reach these next generations. Yeah. And it'll do us some good in the process as well.
And I like that. You know, I did one of my practicums at the Big Chair down in Southeast.
Yeah. What'd you say?
Southeast.
Okay. I thought you put a TH in there. I was like, you know, dang well that ain't Southeast.
Right.
Southeast.
And I used to fight with the psychiatrist. I worked in the early childhood division. So it was the babies who were born addicted from 0 to 5. I used to fight with the psychiatrist because she would diagnose 1-year-olds with ADHD, ODD. And I was like, you don't even know, like, you haven't even like managed them in 2 settings to even know that. Plus, on top of that, these babies were born addicted.
Right.
It is expected that they are going to have some impulsivity. Right. So, yeah, when you said that, I just had a flashback. I was like, you know what? So it's a lot of agencies out here that are not up to par doing what they are supposed to be doing.
I was finna knock one psychiatrist out. I was like, please, let's just come on, man. And you know, God didn't see it fit for dude to, you know, eat that knuckle sandwich that day. But you know, I was ready.
Yeah.
He was violating in the biggest way.
And that's why we have to have people like us in those spaces.
Yeah.
Because we have to be the advocates, because no telling how many babies had gotten that diagnosis. And once you get a diagnosis, it will stay with you.
Yeah. And especially if they put them on medication with the diagnosis.
Exactly.
Right.
That creates chemical dependency.
And the parents are going to go with it because they can get a disability check.
They get that check.
You know, so it's a whole system. It's a whole system of, you know, wreaking havoc.
Reverend Dr. Young, was that King Herod killing all the baby boys, kill them before they grow?
Mm-hmm.
There's a book by Michael Porter, Kill Them Before They Grow. And I was gonna address that book. So I have a different perspective on the whole mental health thing. And I'm a former high school teacher, and medicating these kids and misdiagnosing them. And I read that book years ago, Kill Them Before They Grow, by Michael Porter. And as you spoke about King Herod and Pharaoh too.
Yeah.
And there was a purpose to Pharaoh killing all the male children.
That was a Roman invader, man.
Yeah, that's what it was, man.
It wasn't African, man.
Okay.
Moses and them was Africans. God chose the people was African, man.
Yeah. We know that, brother. We know that. But the story, but it's like, but it's to you guys' point. I mean, you guys have covered everything. As a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, I am actually involved in mentoring programs myself. But I've also found that over the course of my life of mentoring, that the mentee always chooses the mentor. You cannot make a kid listen to you. He has to choose you to be his mentor. And so my only add to what you guys have already said is that just be actively engaged with these young Black men because they need us and they need our experiences. They need to learn from us, hopefully vicariously. One of the biggest fallacies out there is that you have to learn from experience. You don't. You can learn from somebody else's mistakes. And that's why I try to be as genuine, as transparent, well, as translucent as I hate to use the word transparent, because transparent means I want you to see into me, and so I try to be as open as I can with these young men, because even as a high school teacher, I was one of 2 Black male teachers in the high school at that time. I was the only core subject teacher. I taught high school math, coached football, coached track, and no disrespect to the other teacher, he was a physical ed teacher, but there were only 2 Black males in that whole school. I think therein lies the fundamental problem. They don't see enough of us.
Yeah.
And they don't see enough of us who are real. And I used to tell these young brothers all the time, don't get this soup mixed up with who you think I am, and you have to talk to them the way that they understand being talked to sometimes, in love, but at the same time, they need to see more of us. We need to be more actively engaged with these young brothers. And be real when you're talking to them. Because I listened to Jeff. I did not expect Jeff to be who Jeff is. Trust me. And I already got the brother's phone number. We're gonna be talking, man.
Right, I look forward to it.
But they need to hear that type of perspective, because I firmly believe that they need us in their lives. Iron sharpens iron, and just be engaged, man. That's the only thing I can say. And let them find you, and when they do find you, actually be involved in their lives.
I absolutely want to thank you all for being here tonight and joining in on this important conversation. I feel like we need to have a part 2.
Yeah, do that.
I feel
when I'm not in Facebook jail.
Yeah, right. When you're not in Facebook jail and when StreamYard is working, I feel like we need to have a part 2, because I just think we have to keep the conversation going.
I agree.
We just have to. It's just so imperative, and I want our Black boys to know that there is help out there, that there is someone that looks like them that can help them. So without further ado, if you guys can drop your or tell us how you can be reached, so that the audience, because I will post this to Facebook and on YouTube, so that the audience can contact you if they need to, if they're in Chattanooga, if they're in North Carolina, or if they're here in the DC metro area. Marilyn says, excellent conversation. Oh, thanks, Marilyn. Yes, to part 2. Yes, I think we probably will have to do a part 2, because I just think the conversation is just too important for us not to. And I think I specifically want to address trauma, because people think trauma has to be like, oh, you saw people getting shot growing up and you had such a hard life and that's why you have trauma. But trauma can be less significant than that, and people not realize it. So I would like to definitely have a conversation about that and what trauma physically feels like in men. Since I'm a woman, I don't have that experience. So I don't know how you guys experience trauma. So I would like to have that conversation about trauma. I just think that we need to talk about it. I think we need to talk about it a little bit more. But I thank you all. I thank you all for saying yes. I thank you for giving me of your time. I thank you for bearing with the technical difficulties that we were having and were easily able to pivot. I appreciate you. I love all three of you with all my heart. Jeff, am I gonna see you in November? You going to homecoming?
You know what, Roz? I ain't been to homecoming in so long. I think I have to. You know, my son has already chosen Fisk, right?
Oh, wow.
So
He-
you
he
got to
went-
come to homecoming.
He went down there and worked out with Dr. Glover. Yeah, I got a chance to play him in one-on-one on the Fisk floor. It was a historic
Nice.
moment, sis. Yeah.
What does he play, Jeff?
Nice.
Say it again.
What does he play?
Oh, basketball.
Basketball? Okay.
Yep. So, but you know, Raj, just in closing, Raj, you know, I love you too, sis. And you know, anytime you call, I'm there. It don't even matter, sis. So you tell
I'm
me when the
glad you
next one
said
is.
that because we're doing my nonprofit organization. We do a You Matter Mill All Summit.
Good.
So we're gonna have you back as a speaker. Jay was our keynote speaker last year. LaTorrence, he was our moderator last year. So we need to have more engaging conversations. It's just so much that's happening that mental health, we just have to talk about it.
Right. So just say
Yeah.
when. But my
Yeah,
email
I
is
appreciate you, Roz. I appreciate you. Yeah. Anytime you need me, just let me know. And this is wonderful to me. This was beautiful. I love engaging with Black men and getting different perspectives because we all come from different places. We all have different experiences, but we're all the same. And so we definitely need to do this more. I wish we could, we could definitely get like some young boys on here to make sure that they're hearing what we're saying and letting them know that we survive, they can survive too.
And I think that's real. I work with so many young guys who are like, Dr. Roz, I probably won't live past 19. And it's so heartbreaking to hear, but that's a reality for them. It's a scary reality, but I think you're right. They need to see that you can survive, that there are options and that they can have a life here. Uncle Charles, were you asking, can you use this in your men's section? You want to share this to your men's section?
Me?
I was trying to read.
Yeah, I've got a couple of Methodist men's group in a primarily Black neighborhoods, and I would like for them to hear this. So the recording that you're doing, I want to use it as a teaching tool for them.
Yes,
and I
sir.
also want to use it in my quote other Methodist groups, my white Methodist groups or my non-Black Methodist groups, so that they can hear what other people think about, what society sees and does, and how we're preconditioned and how we can fight back on these things. And open communication. I think the key was open communications. If I can talk to you about something, we can probably try to work out a way to resolve it.
Absolutely.
But if we don't, it just stays the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But
Yes,
I
sir.
will be taking the recording that you're doing, and I will be using that in 2 or 3 different places.
No problem. I'll make sure I get it to you as soon as I download it and upload it to YouTube. You'll have it.
Thank you. Answers my question. And
Roz.
gentlemen, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation, and it makes me feel a little like life has been so good to me. I find it difficult to complain. But after listening to you 3 guys and you, my dear child, there is so much in the world that I could have done if given the opportunities. But back in 1964, 65, those opportunities weren't there. But they're there now, and it's incumbent upon us to take advantage of wherever we can. And thank you so much for being a part of that conversation. I appreciate it so much. And I'll shut up now.
No, thank you. Thank you for being here with us.
I have a quick question for Brother Menzik. What's the name of the book that you wrote, sir?
Practical Psychology 101.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Show it to you.
All right, I'm gonna add that to the collection, brother.
Appreciate you, brother.
Is that a textbook?
Yeah, it's I call it a manual, a psychological manual. For Black Lives Matter and all other movements.
Okay. I hear you. So maybe we can have a little fireside chat about that book.
Yeah, like I say, Raj, you let me know.
Yep, will do.
Hey, Roz, to your point, you're saying you had so many young guys tell you that they didn't think they would live past a certain age. I think and I know for me, I'm 57 years old, so I come from that generation, you know, post 60s era. But this is why we need to do these things. We need to have Black men engaged, because I'm where I am right now because of Black men. And those Black men were not perfect Black men. You know, all of those men that allowed me to get to where I am right now, they were hustlers, they were gangsters, they were pimps, they were players, they were all those things, right? But they saw promise in me, and they would not allow me to do the things that I wanted to do. Because growing up, I was smarter than they were. You know, I was supposedly gifted. You know, I was allowed to matriculate with those other folk, right?
Mhm.
But I had to go back to the hood and deal with hood stuff, right? And so when I saw the games that my uncles were playing, they were like, yeah, I see that you want to get involved in this stuff, but you're smarter than that. You're better than that. So we don't want you to do those things. So my point is that iron sharpens iron. They were not perfect men. They were not necessarily good men based on how you perceive them, but they're the ones that saved me. They're the ones that allowed me to be who I am today. So those young men need to have Black men in their lives that can tell them that everything will be all right. You know what I mean? That God has a plan for their life. That God has a plan for their life, and that they just have to see it through and persevere and just, you know, listen to good counsel sometimes.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that that's important, very important. And you're right. If it wasn't for the women in my life mentoring me, I wouldn't be here today myself. So I do think mentoring is very important. Alicia says she tried to get her son on, but don't think he was actively listening. He needs to address his trauma. Well, that's okay. He can come back to our You Matter Male Mentoring Program, Alicia. He'll listen. Well, I'll send you the link to this and you can give it to him. He'll listen. And sometimes we don't get it on the first time. You know what I mean? Sometimes we can't receive it on the first time. But this is a tool that he can have in his tool belt. So when he is having one of those moments, he can listen to this and know that he can persevere and get through anything that he may be dealing with.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, without further ado, thank you so much. Good night, everyone. I appreciate you all. I love you all with the grace of God. And oh, did we give your social media handles? I don't think we did.
I can be reached through our agency's website, www.soundlc.com. That's sound for soundlivingcounseling.com. Again, www.soundlc.com.
Got it. And Reese?
Hey, I'll send it to you, because you know I'm not social media savvy. I don't have mine memorized. So I'll send it to you. I'll text it to you, okay?
Okay, no
All right.
problem. And Dr. Jeff, he put his in his in what was that, Mind Over Matter? Dr. Jeff and Mind Over Matter?
Yeah, Mind on the Matter.
Mind on the Matter.
But social media handle is just gonna be my name. It's the real Dr. Jeff Menzie, Dr. Jeff Menzie. Last name is Menzise.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much. Have a blessed night. And thank you for dealing with all my technical issues of me not knowing what I was doing.
Thanks
So
again, brothers. Y'all have a nice.
Hey, it's really
Take care,
nice meeting you,
fam.
brothers, man. Take care, man.
Likewise. Peace.
I'll be in touch, Jeff.
Yes, sir.
Good night, everyone.
Peace, Ross.
Good night.
Good night.